They might just be. Imagine your mom being your aunt. Your mom.
I would say, yeah, I would have.
They were so hot.
Your mom.
Parents were so and then for your dad. Okay. So yeah,
That is true.
They're making your hands.
We will have to have some kind of food day after the AP exam.
Imagine having.
Yeah, you can watch me.
Might look a little funny too.
Not maybe you would.
It only gets worse after the second time. The first time, second time. That's pretty good.
If it all works out, that'd be, I mean, it's really good.
So you don't mind that.
Which are the second and the first.
You can like the day go around.
All right, everybody. And so we're finishing the first, which is the big one. And then we're going to do conspiracy theories. Actually, let's start conspiracy theories. Conspiracy start theories. You part of this?
Yes. Yeah.
Are you a member of this? We're trying to distract us. All right, everybody. First thing is first. So I will be gone on Friday and Monday. You're gonna watch about 25 to 30-minute video. It's like 26 minutes, but you know, however long it takes to get set up and everything. There'll be like a little table you have to fill out with it. What's that? I did do that. And see, cannot box the box. I see. And so I forgot what I was going to say. What you think, Tess?
You said that you were gonna.
And a thing, and then another thing. I'm really worried about the video for you guys. I'm really worried because it is incredible special effects.
Just have to hear reach over in front of it.
All right, so, all right. So it has amazing special effects, and I'm a little bit worried about some of you because it shows. I mean, the scenes will blow your mind. It has people disappearing, appearing, flying through air. Most terrifyingly of all, it has the reanimation of the dead. They come alive. So I will write to the sub that we will have a cry room set up. If you've ever noticed that closet, that door back there, people think it's the closet, that's the cry room. If you just can't take it, we'll just put you in there. It's pitch black, and on Tuesday when I get back, I'll let you out, and you should be calm. Sound good? So some of you, I'm just warning you, be afraid. All right. And then you have two things to do. The big thing is about about the last third of chapter 7 and a map. And so you have the rest of the time after the video and all day Monday to get that done. Monday, remember, I have short periods anyways. That's what we have to do. So sound good to everybody? All right. I'll remind you of a few more things tomorrow. Here we go. Huh? Who's our sub? I gotta look again. Huh? So, what did we finish here? Did we get to, we got to the Habsburgs. Did anyone have a nightmare with them in it? Oh, state power is what compromises the Constitution? 3/5. And let's review, as you can all look at Philip and Charles. Let's review. It's a quasi-war the United States had with what country did the US have a quasi-war with? France. And with France, Republicans criticized them. What were the laws we lumped together to restrict immigration and speech? The Alien and Sedition Act, which was meant to shut up what political party? The Republicans. What were the two resolutions written by Jefferson and Madison against us? Kentucky and Virginia. What do you call it when a state does not obey a law they find unconstitutional? What is that called? I heard succeed. I heard nullify. What does it mean to leave the Union? C. Nullification, secession. Hey, by the way, it's CC. S-C-C-E-D-E. It's not succeed. It's easy. All right. Then we got Hapgood. Oh, Burr. What did Burr decide to do when the vote was tied? I'll say it's president. Who threw their support to Jefferson, even though he hated Jefferson? And don't forget, Hamilton was in disgrace. He was vilified for his actions as Secretary of the Treasury. He had had a very public extramarital affair. He was kind of corrupt. Yeah. We got right. This look right?
Yeah.
So remember I told you there was like a whispering thing about Jefferson, the slave owner? So we did not get to this. 1801, it became public. And it would be a big issue in the 1804 election. And it was the issue of Sally Hemings. Remember I told you how horrible slavery was? Well, Jefferson's wife had passed away 25 years before he became president. And she was always with her personal servant, slave. Her personal servant, Sally Hemings. So when he went to, Hemings was Jefferson's wife's slave. And then as soon as they got married, that became Jefferson's. It wasn't, the wife still had some of the property. By 1820, the wife would lose that. As soon as the woman got married, she became the property of her husband. That's going to last for only about 170 years. But back to this. Hemings went with him when he went to Paris, when he was ambassador to France. She was always there. And she had children. And many of them were redheaded. I wonder who was redheaded. Jefferson. That's weird, isn't it? And so the story came out that she was, and they would say it like, like I'm adding air quotes. That's his mistress. She's slave. She had no choice. Well, she might willingly do it because she might get better treatment and she'd be beaten if she didn't. But we all know what this was. So Jefferson had children with Sally Hemings. She had no choice. And this became a major issue by 1804. And so when you ran for re-election, they said it all over the North, but in the South, this infuriated Southern plantation owners because they wanted to hide this. Remember the fornication laws. So this was made in 1802, but it would become engraved and put out in handbills kind of secretly against Jefferson in 1804. Virginian slaveholders, luxuries. The slaver beating their slaves, slaver ratings. And that was against Jefferson. So this issue would blow up about slave power. That's what basically the gloves came off, so to speak. And we'll come back to this. But the children. Oh, the children, what are they? Are they slave or free? Because they're fathers. They're slaves, the fornication laws. They are slaves. Did he free them? Oh, in fact, he sold some of them when he needed money. So, Jefferson's inauguration, he was dubbed the Revolution of 1800. But it really wasn't a revolution in the way you might think. The Federalists were convinced he's going to blow everything up. These are the two things you have to add to this revolution. He really didn't change Federalist policies. He kept the Federalist government basically intact. He used the bank. He used the power that came from the Assumption Bill or the money that came from the tariffs. The revolution was this: a peaceful transference of power. It peacefully went from Adams to Jefferson. And that's a big deal. That had been relatively rare. I mean, you're going to have to go back to, elements of the Roman Republic pre-Empire, pre about 130 BCE. And so that's the revolution. Now let's get to when inauguration is going to happen. Okay, today, the election is election day. Technically, people can vote early, but the election day is the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. Check the way it is. First Tuesday after the first Monday. Then the election didn't happen. So state assemblies could be voted on earlier, later. State assemblies met sometime in October and November and picked electors. And once they picked electors, you had a pretty good idea which way they were going to go. they formally voted in December. So December 1800, they voted, and Jefferson, now remember, Jefferson didn't get the majority because there was a tie, but December, you probably knew. The president would not be inaugurated to the next March. And so the election of 1800, Jefferson won eventually, but would not be seated until March 3rd, 1801. Today, the election is November. The president is not inaugurated until January 20th of next year. Sure, most of you paying attention and notice that President Trump's elected without being inaugurated until January 20th. And they call somebody who's an elected official, so they're elected, but they're either good, they didn't win re-election, they're leaving office, they won't be around for the next term. They call that person in the US, I think, a pretty good name. It's called a lame duck. So Adams is lame duck for 4 months until Jefferson became president. So Jefferson's inauguration, he laid out this idea of his philosophy. And it is not radically different, but in many ways it will become kind of the American dream. And he would try to act like a commoner. He is riding his horse around the very empty Washington, D.C. So what are the main elements of Jefferson's philosophy that will come out of this? Well, the first thing is this concept of the power in the common man. Therefore, Jeffersonian democracy. Now, the common man did not mean mediocre, as his opponents would say, or opponents of Andrew Jackson would say. The common man, to repeat, not of aristocratic or wealthy birth, meaning anybody would have the chance to succeed in this and have their life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But Jefferson by no means was a commoner. But the element it means is Jefferson believed that people are sovereign. The people have ultimate power. They have elected officials. The elected officials make most of the decisions. But the people have power. But don't forget, the Constitution is such that people still don't have very much power. But you notice I put in quotes. When Jefferson said the people are sovereign in the common man, what kind of man is he talking about? Not even property, just white men. Just white men. So, and that's actually a big step for white men in property. So even men who did not have property, did Jefferson's vision have power? And so that is a big step from what most of the elite would have said, white men with property. That is a big step towards democracy, a big step towards the people who are sovereign. But clearly, if you believe in democracy, not big enough. It's skipping over half the population. Now, I will tell you my bias. I'm very biased towards democracy. I believe it. But not everyone does. So I am biased towards it. And so I see this as a big step. I'm not going to downplay it. I'm not going to say, well, it didn't include everybody, so it's not a big step. No, it's a really big step. But there's a lot further steps. To those who do not believe in democracy, that's going too far. But Jefferson really didn't believe that people should have the ultimate power. He still thought the elite should do it. He play acted a common man. He would purposely wear, the tight pants they wore then were called breeches. And he would wear ripped breeches and ride around Washington, D.C. like a common working. It was no commoner. Look at that house. That is his house at Monticello. He greatly admired Roman architecture, so domes were a big deal to show classical architecture. So the first U.S. Capitol will have a dome that looks exactly like it. They would rip it off and build the current Capitol with addition and silver. Current dome. There's Jefferson's home. Now it's a national home. Or suppose not, just the government shut. How many stories is it? Standing back so we can all see it. How many stories? Okay, basic story, then how many stories above? Does it look kind of like two? See the main window and then one smaller story with the rotunda. See the windows? There's 4 stories and lots of windows. He wanted it to look more modest. He wanted it to look like a smaller home. So from a distance, it has the illusion of 1 story in the main floor. It has actually 3. These windows are huge. This door is massive. So when we get closer, the door is huge and the handle is way down here. and you open the door and go into a foyer, it's like a split level home. There's another floor and then another one right above that. He wanted the illusion of being a common man and power with the commoners. But even he couldn't pull it off that he was a commoner. It's in Charlottesville, Virginia. If you get a chance, Monticello is really cool. Soon the government will be running. You never know. The longest government shutdown was during Trump's first term, and he backed down when air traffic controllers who aren't being paid started calling in sick. And once flights didn't run, next thing you know, it was solved. What are air traffic controllers doing right now? They're beginning all of it. There's a 2-hour delays at airports right now. If you're flying somewhere, be ready for a delay. Doesn't mean it'll happen, but that's what's going on right now. It's one of the things just to kind of watch. All right. So the people are talking. He loved machines. He loved inventions. He was a tinkerer. He has all these great inventions, including has one. He called it his personal scribe or monoscribe. He could write on one piece of paper and it was attached to a pencil that would copy the same thing on another piece. It's really cool. Like an early copy machine. All right. Number 2. Why? Agrarian. He believed in the society of yeomen. A yeoman. Yeoman. Anybody know what a yeoman is? A yeoman is an independent farmer. They own their own land. And this goes back to the Declaration of Independence and its vision of how you can have rights by owning your own property. Land ownership is the only way to be truly free. Only way to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You are not independent if you own or work for somebody else. So his thought was, we must open up land and have small farmers. But once again, he by no means was a small farmer. That was his vision for the United States. So here are 2 paintings. Well, one's a lithograph. They would use the print, but that settler myth, where settlers would come into the West and take this wild, untamed land and tame it, farm it. And here's a little bit later of a yeoman farmer as the master of their domain. Hey, they might not have much, but nobody tells them what to do. They grow their own crops, they feed their family, they make a little bit of money, and they can vote the way they want and exercise their liberty. That's why he was so fearful of Hamilton and the idea of bringing industry and what's going on in Britain. He would have looked at somebody working for somebody else in a factory or a tenant farmer. You're working as a day laborer for a farmer, as a wage slave. You're nothing but a slave if you work for somebody else. You must do what they say. Isn't it amazing that we all now do something? I will tell you about that. But they literally had to beat workers into submission. They finally accepted that. And they never really cared. But that's why he feared what was happening in Britain. They didn't know what was coming, but he was terrified of it. So Jefferson wasn't anti-factory. He wasn't anti-machine. He loved it. He was anti one person owning the whole thing and then everyone having to come to them for a wage. That's what he didn't like. He didn't like this thing he feared this thing that we now call capitalism. It was terrifying. So this is going to be the American dream. So many people are going to come to the United States hoping someday they can get that little piece of land. And if they have to work in a factory, they still dreamt, even though probably isn't going to happen. Maybe they'll get that piece of land. And people with wealth are going to build a little slot in the countryside so they can act like a yeoman farmer. Now, in the 1920s and 1930s, the farm economy is going to explode, and that dream will kind of die. The new American dream will happen. A home, a car, that kind of thing. But do you notice people still do that when they get wealth? They go buy a little piece of land in the country and act like they're a farmer or a rancher. But that would never happen in Montana. Can you imagine that? Once again, there I just buy. How many people come to Montana and buy a ranch, have a lot of money, and act like they're a rancher for 2 years? A lot. Hey, what does that do to real estate values? It makes it more affordable for working people of Montana. No, of course. Next, they feared a large central government. So fear central government. I don't know why I've been feared, I've been feared. Fear. And what he thought was a state government would be more powerful, and he pushed this idea that he got from one of the most influential books in history, The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith. We will have to get to it when we talk about industrialization. Some of you probably have heard of that. But laissez-faire talks, Adam Smith talked about the most effective way to ensure competition, and Jefferson thinking competition among small farmers, was hands off by government. And he took a French term that I learned the Americanized version of it, which is mispronouncing it as laissez-faire. It's French. It's not, that's not how you pronounce it in French, but that's teachers talking about it, economics professors talking about that, laissez-faire. So government hands off. How would you say it if you were speaking the actual French? Yeah, laissez-faire. But everyone said laissez. And hands off by government. Now, why? We've mentioned this once before, but this goes back to the Tea Act. And remember the creation of a monopoly for the East India Company, a company that was failing, creation of a monopoly. That's that large central government will only help the wealthy big businesses, i.e. create monopolies. That's what big government will do. So you get rid of big government, he thought. Get rid of central government, and that will discourage monopolies. You have to be very clear about this. I mentioned he feared capitalism. Well, capitalism didn't really exist yet. This is pre-capitalism. And as it turns out, laissez-faire actually encourages monopolies. But that's another story we'll get to down the road. But this is why I put down the world capital of Washington, and that now the watercolor of the brand new executive mansion. You have to wait till after the War of 1812, when it'll be called the White House. So, this is still pre-capitalism. Next, so he's really worried about big government programs like Hamiltonian economics. Really fearful of it. And so what he wants to do is to avoid Hamiltonian economics throughout the merchant class and bring factories and therefore wage slavery to the United States. He wanted a frugal government. Frugal is careful with their spending. So he wanted to cut spending. And he talked a big deal about the virtues of long-term debt. To avoiding long-term debt, I'm sorry, the virtues of it. So bonds should be short-term and pay it back very quickly. And he claimed, therefore, we can lower taxes. But it wasn't the taxes. It was the purpose of the taxes that he was upset about. If you don't have long-term debt, you won't need tariffs which protect industry. And what was the excise tax? The tax on what product after the Assumption Bill? Do you remember? The whiskey tax, which hit farmers. So it wasn't so much the tax, it was what the taxes were for. It wasn't so much the debt, it was if you have debt, you got to pay it back with taxes he didn't want. He didn't want an industrial policy that would lead to something else. One more thing, that's why he shut down West Point. West Point was a fort that, remember the Fort Benedict Arnold? They'd reopen it 19 years later as the military academy copied the French. I can believe. See them. So there you go. And they mothballed a couple of the ships at the Constellation. But don't forget, it wasn't so much the debt, it was the process of paying back the debt and what the debt was for. And it's not that he didn't want a strong central government. He wanted the strong central government to take the West. He was obsessed with the West. First off, for yeomen, open up land for small farms. Andrew Jackson was correct when he said, I am carrying out Jefferson's policy by every measure. He's also a plantation owner. Remember, they're obsessed with land. I told you about tobacco, cultivation, bleaching soil. And he wanted more land in the West to open up land for American Indians. So if you look at this map over here, this is the massive land claim that was technically Spain and secretly gave it back to the French, called Louisiana. He wanted this land in the West so they could force American Indians who lived here, these woodland nations, to move here. Open up land for small farmers. By the way, if they don't go, what's going to happen? Or, forcing them. That's Jefferson's policy. And then maybe someday there'll be civilized with similar. Maybe not. He thought this would be more enough land for Americans. He went coast out. What wrong? His back porch of Monticello faced west, so you can see the Appalachian Mountains. He would go out up to the Potomac River. It's a place called Jefferson's Roost, this amazing place called Harper's Ferry, I posted before, and just sit and look west and dream of going west. So this wasn't a casual thing. And this is the powerful Creek Tribal Council, the Creek tribe of what is now Alabama. But lastly, the most important element of philosophy, pragmatic. Pragmatic means doing whatever is practical or necessary to get your accomplishments. Now, Jefferson might say one thing. He might say something about whatever policy it might be, but then he might do something totally opposite. He saw it's necessary to get his key goal done. Remember, he wanted the West. He might have said something, but he wanted the West. He dreamt about agrarian farming. He had this goal. So he was not going to be tied to something he might have said one time in a speech or laid out a paper. No. Give you 3 examples. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say the U.S. can purchase land. But when he had a chance to buy Louisiana, he jumped at it. And used the necessary and proper clause to say a treaty can purchase land. Remember, he criticized Hamilton for the Bank of the United States, saying that you're illegally, unconstitutionally stretching that unnecessary and proper clause. And then he turns around and does it himself. That's pragmatic. He wanted the land. Next, the Barbary Wars. The United States and another kind of coalition would go to war in the Mediterranean against Barbary pirates. We only had a few ships. He decommissioned most of them. He didn't ask for a declaration of war. He just did it. The same thing he criticized the Federalists for with the Quasi-War. Lastly, so that's triple. He knew slavery was wrong. He proposed no slavery in the West. He knew it would destroy the Republic. And yet, not only would he never get rid of his lists, never. He did everything possible to spread slavery and spread slavery. Even though he knew slavery would destroy the Republic and he knew slavery was immoral. Even when he died, he passed his slave on to his other children, certainly not his children with Sally Heming, and they became property of his children. And he sold a lot too because he was in so much debt. He had so much debt. And his collateral were his slaves. So that's pragmatism. That is the most important element. Did everyone hear what I said? Did everyone catch that? This is what they call emphasis on purpose, the most important element. So he might have said a lot of things, but when it came right down to it, he did whatever he thought was necessary. How many American presidents have been pragmatic? Most. The most pragmatic president in American history, without a doubt, is intensely pragmatic. You were born during George W. Bush, not very pragmatic. But then most of your life, or the first part of your life was Barack Obama's president, right? So pragmatic that he would drive his supporters and opponents nuts. Trump is pragmatic in a different sort of way. But to your supporters, Jefferson supporters. That's sound leadership. It had to be done. We did what's necessary for the strength of the country. Makes sense, right? What did his opponent say when you said strong central government and then you turn around and expand the power of government? You're a what? What is the term for doing one thing and then you're a hypocrite? Were they hypocrites? Yeah. This might shock you. Sometimes people running for office or just wanting something for you will say whatever it takes to get it done. Did I just blow your mind? That's why it's important to know stuff. That's why I gave you the little example of the Constitution shoveling the shores of Iraq. Be very wary of what people say, for the most part. Except for me. I would never lie. Someone. But just be, it's important to be skeptical. All right. So let's get back to what's going on. This is the philosophy. Remember, Adams is still laying down. Right before he left office, he realized, in fact, this is the same thing. Jefferson is going to destroy the country. He will destroy it. So he did something to leave a legacy, a Federalist legacy for Jefferson and for the next 30 years. It's going to be called the Midnight Justices. The Federalists in Congress, they still have control. Heck, the next Congress wouldn't be seated until August of 1801. They created a bunch of new federal courts and new judges. I put justices, but I meant judges. Please. So everyone got that. They created a bunch of new judges. So they appointed a bunch of Federalists. A bunch of Federalist judges. How long is an appointment for judge? Yeah, a lifetime appointment. So long after Adams is on office, there'll still be Federalist judges. The most important will be the Chief Justice. Adams appointed John Marshall of Virginia. So we have the Marshall Court, the longest court in American history. I think next year or the year after, I'm trying to think. Let me get back to this. I'm trying to get. I'm not thinking about something else. The Marshall Court, and so he will be Chief Justice in the Supreme Court 15 years after the Federalist Party died. He's still the Federalist. The Federalist Party disappeared. He's still Chief Justice. He will still be Chief Justice 9 years after Adams. That shows you the power of appointing judges. That shows you the power. So, this will lead to the Marshall Court. And this is going to be, okay, nationalism has some different terms, but this will be called a nationalist court. A nationalist court. Meaning, strengthen the power of the central government. If you strengthen the power of the central government, by definition, what's going to be weaker? Which governments? Yeah, the states. So this is national. We'll come back to the actual definition of nationalism a little bit later. But here we have Marshall. So one of the courts they created real quick, and then appointed a guy named William Marbury. Marbury was going to be appointed a judge. Back then, they appointed him, and it went to the Secretary of State. It's not like that now. But the Secretary of State begins the process of seating their new court. Well, they did it literally the night before the inauguration. So it went to Jefferson's Secretary of State, which was James Madison. And Madison said, not going to seat you. Nope, not going to do it. And then the Republicans in Congress got rid of that court credit. Marbury sued Madison. Before we get to that, I'll tell you one thing about the inauguration. They had the inauguration. Adams was so mad he wasn't elected. And there wasn't peaceful transference of power, but he didn't go to the inauguration. Which is quite the same. Didn't go to the inauguration. How many presidents have gone to the inauguration? Or how many presidents have skipped the inauguration? Both Adamses. Adam's son was so mad, he didn't go either. Yeah, they're both kind of beaten. They're beaten to me. Andrew Johnson, who was impeached, did not go to Ulysses S. Grant, and one more. So, the court case, Marbury versus Madison. And this is the most important court case in American history. The most important court case in American history. Because what they said is that Republican law to get rid of its judgeship was unconstitutional. And therefore created the concept of judicial review. That the courts can test the constitutionality of law. But I didn't add this. If there is a court case, if there is a civil suit, and it gets to the Supreme Court, they can test it. They don't interpret laws unless there's a court case. Now, add one more thing. It wouldn't be too about the Civil War that people began to accept this power. They gave themselves the power. It's not the Supreme Court. So no patient or presidential veto is still talked about. This was not established presidential power. Today we accept it. And the Roberts Court, which next year, I think it's next year or the year after, will become the second longest court in America. Marshall Court, then the Roberts Court, the current one. They've used judicial review more than any other court in history by far. By far. Usually reversing rights or taking back laws. Most famously, like for example, getting rid of the right to abortion. Most famously, but other ones. There's a couple really big ones coming out on voting rights. So, Jefferson was furious. Jefferson wanted to get rid of the Supreme Court. He wanted Republicans, that's why I put R's, he wanted Republicans to impeach Roberts or other members of the Supreme Court. He even talked about either a constitutional amendment or playing with the courts for term limits. Now, none of those happened. Marshall, of course, was not impeached. One justice was, Pinckney was impeached, but he was clearly both shockingly corrupt. I mean, just so obviously taking bribes and mentally ill. He's the only only justice to be impeached. You're not going to have to know. I had a little bit of coffee left from this morning, and I did not mean to drink my coffee. It's not. You ever done that when you think you're drinking like water and you get something else? Whew, that did not taste good. Okay. So. This would not be, though, fully accepted. There'll be a fight for 50 years in the court. Andrew Jackson will have the same kind of fight. So court rulings were not accepted as being necessarily applying to the states or the federal government. And this is going to be misinterpreted time after time after time, especially during Jackson's administration. We'll get to it with people will say stuff about him and Indian removal all the time, and they're almost completely 100% wrong. We'll get to it. So don't write this down. Do you remember the Treaty of Grenville after the Battle of Falling Winds? And it gave the United States the Ohio, which they would, that's Fallen Timbers. This is the Ohio. Eventually that would become Ohio. Well, there was just a massive land rush. And all these people came in to try to claim land, speculators, settlers to take land. Just overnight, they had it big enough to become a state. Now, do you remember the land ordinances we mentioned before? The land ordinance of 1785 did the surveying of it, township and sections. Does that sound familiar? The other one, the Northwest Ordinance, set up territory to state, and also no slave codes. So it said no slave codes. But it really didn't have the process to actually, okay, now there'll be a state. It said there'll be states, but it said the process of saying, okay, now you're a state. What do? Well, this will become the basis of Jefferson's land policy. To open up this land once owned by the woodland nations and turn it into cheap land for yeomen. There's a Land Act of 1804. You're not going to have to know that one. The one we have to know is the Enabling Act. And that would set up, there'll be Ohio, a state. You kind of set up, formalize the process of the Northwest Ordinance. And open it up for yeomen. There were 3 other states already admitted. Vermont, Kentucky, and Tennessee. But they already had a lot of people take that land. Remember Daniel Boone? Remember I told you about him? That's Kentucky and Tennessee. But almost every other state in the union will come in under the procedure for the enablement, including Montana. The only ones that won't will be like California, Texas, Alaska, and Hawaii. It's different because of how they came into the union. We have more independent countries. US either annexed or took. Who's this guy? Did anyone ever heard of Johnny Appleseed? I remember that from elementary school. I remember a big unit when I was in second grade. It was about like Miss in America, like Johnny Appleseed. Who's the really tall lumberjack? Paul Bunyan, anyone knows this bull? This ox, I mean. Babe, the blue ox. I remember we had all this stuff about this. It really stuck with me. I thought that was really cool. Johnny Appleseed, a real person. John Chapman was a Republican. And John Chapman believed in the concept of yeoman farmers. He really did walk around Ohio in the early 1800s planting apple trees. So when small farmers got this piece of land, they'd have a small apple orchard so they could immediately have apples. Because what product would they make out of apples that they could add value to? Hard cider. Remember whiskey? So another alcoholic beverage. They drank a lot more than people today. And so he's a real person. Was Paul Bunyan real? No, that was totally. He was actually 80 feet tall. You're right, had to be Paul Bunyan. Must be real. Yeah, with the plow, good point. It was actually an advertisement for a paper towel company. Kind of ruins the old story of Paul Bunyan. I remember being told like settlers would tell this tale around the fire. No, it's just sell paper towels. It was called the Red River Paper Company. It's special topics, usually special. We have to do a unit on this. It's a really fun unit. It's really fun. It's a really fun unit. Yeah. Listen to Paul. We should listen to the what? The Paul Bunyan song? We should. Sunday afternoon, Sunday morning, I'll be here at 6 a.m. Let's listen to it. Everyone. Paul Bunyan. Oh. All right, so. One other problem with this. Now remember, there's no slave codes, because that's Northwest Ordinance. We actually forgot one kind of important thing in the bill. Here they talk about, okay, now this will form license procedure with the state, et cetera, et cetera. They forgot one little minor thing. The bill never actually created the state of Ohio. It mentioned Ohio a number of times, but never actually said Ohio will be created as a state. So Ohio became a state. They sent 2 members of the Senate, at first one, but eventually many members of the House. But Ohio officially was a state. Anybody want to guess for how long? About 187 years. They wouldn't actually change that until early 1990. So technically, Ohio wasn't a state. Does anybody know, and I've already given you a massive hint, what state is the home to most presidents? Ohio. And it wasn't even a state. Banana. All right. Couple more things and we're done. Now, remember the Barbary Pirates? I'm going to tell you really quickly to kind of finish off the Tripoli Wars. It went from 1801 to 1805. And it was a coalition of various countries to stop the pirates. The US had already signed a treaty with these pirates. They're basically sultans or little fiefdoms all along the Mediterranean. One of the biggest was in Tripoli, which is today the capital of. Anybody know what country? War-torn, civil war, ravaged country. Tripoli's capital of? Libya. Libya. We already paid them a bribe. And they said, we want more money. But that's always a problem. Once someone extorts money out of you, they keep coming back for more. Well, we joined other countries and said, we're going to finally stop the scourge of Mediterranean pirates. And they were slaves too. It was a massive slave trade. They would capture crews and enslave them. And so we didn't have really a military. And Jefferson cut a lot of them. We only had a few ships, and we basically bought a bunch of like private merchant vessels. We have a few hundred naval infantry. Today, does anyone know what we call naval infantry? We call it then today, but what's naval infantry? They're part of the US Navy. Originally, they were going to be onboard ships so they could take pot shots at the enemy or board ships with them. Yeah, they're the Marines. The Marines. And we sent them to Tripoli. It failed at first because we had just a tiny little force. We tried to get with some Swedes and a few other places at Dharma. Basically failed there. Did take a small fort in Tripoli in 1804, but then pulled out. It failed. And in 1805, we acknowledged wasn't going to work. We ended up paying the bribe anyways. But it was undeclared. So Marines to this day are actually part of the US. The Marines are not an independent branch. And if you really want to have a lot of fun and make a new friend, go up to a Marine or a former Marine and just remind them that they're part of the Navy. And they'll really appreciate it. You have a friend for life. Just go up, just go up to them. Oh, you're a Marine. Did you know you're part of the Navy? And they'll just, oh, let me talk to you. And we'll come. Don't do that. You want to get someone hate you for life. Oh, it's very weird. It's almost like irrational how much they hate the Navy and they're part of the Navy. It's kind of funny. So here's the West. See that area? Is that what color would you call that for Louisiana? Yeah, salmon. They're in salmon. In salmon. So during the Treaty of Paris of 1763, after the French and Indian War, France gave the claim. They just claimed this, the Spain. In secret, in 1800, the Spanish gave it back to the French. Even though they didn't tell really anybody. There were still Spanish administrators running, there's basically two cities, Louisiana, Spain, New Orleans and St. Louis. Here's the United States. Remember, Jefferson wants to turn that into land for yeomen. So he wants Louisiana to be areas to force American Indians. But the big thing is this, New Orleans. Before that, any of that can happen, here's Ohio. If farmers are in Ohio want to get their crop to market, what's the fastest and cheapest way to get their crop to market? Is the cheapest way to get their crop to market. Fly it, right? Get a kite. It's so expensive to go over the mountains. It was actually cheaper and almost as fast to go all the way down to Ohio, down the Mississippi, around Florida, and that way. So they needed New Orleans. And so he decided, step one, see if I can't annex New Orleans. That means he's got to go ask the French. And that's what leads to the Louisiana Purchase. Who's this dashing young man? He's very dashing. That's Napoleon. Yes, that's Napoleon. And by the way, Napoleon was not short. That's British propaganda. He's 6'9". He was about 5'9". He was average. The average height for an American male is about 5'10" and a half now. He's about 5'9". A little taller now, more protein. Hey, what's the tallest country? I told you this once before. The Netherlands, tallest country in the world. Dutch are tall. Damn Dutchman. Okay, we're excited to see the cast. We're all excited to see the cast tomorrow. 2 weeks. I'm good. I know. It's like an infirmary. Goodbye, everybody. Have a good lunch. And the rest of your Wednesday. It's gonna snow this weekend. Not too explosive. Leave them out. Maybe, here. Hey, we get my phone, I drop it 15 minutes later, so once. You first asked me, I in my head today was Tuesday. So I got 2 copies to make. So the plan is to watch that. Let me print this for you. Just give me 1 sec. Where are you going?
I'm going to Utah for my brother's wedding.
Oh, okay.